Two stone lions have stood guard over a silent hilltop for 3,500 years. This is the Lion Gate of Mycenae, the oldest monumental sculpture in all of Europe. It is not merely an ancient doorway, it is a portal to a vanished world of warrior kings, epic legends, and a civilization that mastered stone to proclaim its power. By the end of our journey, you will understand how this single gateway reveals the rise, the genius, and the ultimate mystery of the Mycenaean age. What secrets did these builders encode in their architecture, and why were the lions' heads deliberately removed, lost to time? When you look at a monument this old, what do you believe it takes for something to truly endure? To understand the lions, we must first walk the lands they watched over. The Mycenaean civilization flourished for 5 centuries, from roughly 1600 to 1100 before the Common Era. This was not a loose collection of villages, but a network of powerful, fortified kingdoms, each ruled from a hilltop palace. Mycenae itself was the mightiest of these citadels, its name eventually given to the entire age. From their strategic perch, these warrior kings commanded fertile plains, controlled crucial trade routes across the Aegean Sea, and amassed astonishing wealth in gold, bronze, and exotic goods. Their world was one of grand, sprawling complexes, of scribes keeping records on clay tablets in an early script called Linear B, and of far-reaching connections that stretched to Egypt, Anatolia, and beyond. This is the society that likely inspired the legends we know so well. When Homer sang of golden Mycenae, rich in gold, and the great king Agamemnon who led the Greeks to Troy, he was weaving tales from the deep memory of this very civilization. The Lion Gate, then, is not just an entrance, it is the proud stone face of that legendary power, built to awe any visitor approaching its walls. For centuries, the lions stood in silence, their story buried under layers of earth and legend. The great citadel of Mycenae faded from memory, its name surviving only in the epic poems of Homer, which many considered beautiful fiction. That changed in the 1870s when a man named Heinrich Schliemann arrived with a shovel and an unshakable conviction. A self-made businessman and an amateur archaeologist, Schliemann was obsessed with proving that the Trojan War and the heroes of Homer were historical fact. He believed the tales literally, and he believed that golden Mycenae, the city of Agamemnon, was waiting to be found. His methods were, by modern standards, shockingly crude, driven more by passion for treasure than scientific precision. Yet, when his workers began digging into the great earthen mound at Mycenae, they uncovered something no one expected to find intact. There, still holding up thousands of tons of stone, was the monumental Lion Gate. Imagine the scene. The massive limestone blocks were still perfectly fitted, the triangular slab above the doorway still perfectly balanced, and the 2 majestic lionesses, though headless, still radiating a formidable power. After more than 3,000 years, the gate was not a ruin. It was a statement standing defiantly against time. Early drawings and the first grainy photographs from the period show a landscape of stark drama. The gate emerged from a tangle of wild shrubs and rubble, a geometric puzzle of colossal stones against a barren hillside. For those first explorers, the immediate question was not just what it was, but what it meant. The sheer scale suggested a fortress, but the elaborate sculpture spoke of something more. Some speculated it was the entrance to a royal tomb. Others thought it must lead to a temple of the gods. The truth, as they would slowly piece together, was that it was the heart of both political power and spiritual belief, a fusion that made this gateway so uniquely mysterious. The gate that emerged from the earth is a masterpiece of brute force and careful calculation. To stand before it is to feel small. The entrance itself is a post and lintel construction, a simple but profound concept. 2 vertical monoliths, each a single, massive block of gray limestone, rise from the ground to support an even more enormous horizontal slab, the lintel. This lintel stone is staggering, measuring over 15 feet long, nearly 8 feet wide and 3 feet thick, weighing an estimated 20 tons. Imagine the effort, the ropes, the wooden rollers, the coordinated labor of hundreds to hoist this single stone into place atop the towering post. But the Mycenaean engineers faced a critical problem. A simple rectangular doorway with a heavy lintel creates a point of immense stress. The weight of the fortress wall above would eventually crack the stone and collapse the entrance. Their ingenious solution sits directly above the lintel, and it is the gate's most defining feature. They left a void, a carefully shaped triangular opening in the masonry. This is the relieving triangle. Its genius is in its emptiness. By creating this open space, the builders redirected the colossal weight of the wall down through the solid stone on either side of the doorway, bypassing the vulnerable lintel entirely. It is a perfect marriage of form and function, a stroke of architectural brilliance carved in stone 3.5 millennia ago. And it is within this sacred, weight-bearing triangle that they placed their guardians, the two lionesses, carved from a single, separate slab of harder stone. The entire structure is built in what later Greeks would call Cyclopean masonry. The walls are assembled from gigantic, irregular blocks, some weighing many tons, fitted together with astonishing precision, yet without a drop of mortar. The joints are so tight that later observers, seeing these colossal ruins, could not believe human hands were responsible. They attributed the work to the mythical one-eyed giants, the Cyclopes, giving this mighty style its legendary name. This was not mere construction, it was a declaration. The Lion Gate announced that the rulers within possessed not only the wealth to command such labor, but the engineering knowledge to defy gravity itself. That empty triangle above the door is far more than a decorative space. It is the brilliant heart of the gate's entire design, a stroke of pure architectural genius. The Mycenaean builders understood a fundamental law of physics. The immense weight of the fortress wall, built from those colossal Cyclopean blocks, would bear down with crushing force. A simple rectangular doorway with a horizontal lintel supporting everything above it would be its weakest point. Over time, the pressure would crack the lintel and bring the entire entrance crashing down. Their solution was elegant in its simplicity. They carved a void, a precise, empty triangle, directly into the masonry above the lintel. This is the relieving triangle, and its purpose is right in the name. It relieves the stress. By creating this open space, the builders cleverly redirected the wall's colossal weight away from the vulnerable center. The force was channeled down and outward, flowing through the solid stone on either side of the doorway, safely bypassing the lintel entirely. Think of it as creating a path of least resistance for gravity itself, a stone riverbed that guides a torrent of weight safely around a fragile point. This single innovation allowed the gateway to stand for millennia, but here is where function transforms into profound artistry. The Mycenaeans did not leave this crucial, load-bearing void as a bare, geometric shape. They used it as their canvas. The slab with the lionesses was not added later as an ornament. It was carved from a separate, denser stone and carefully fitted into that triangle, becoming a structural component itself. The art is the architecture. This fusion is what makes the Lion Gate so extraordinary. Centuries later, medieval architects would develop the pointed Gothic arch to achieve a similar goal, distributing the weight of cathedral walls to create soaring, light-filled spaces. The Mycenaeans, working 3,000 years earlier with only stone and muscle, arrived at their own elegant solution. They turned a critical engineering problem into an opportunity for a monumental statement, proving that their mastery was not just about moving mountains of rock, but about shaping the very forces of nature to serve both security and symbol. And within that triangle of brilliant engineering rests a masterpiece of art. Carved from a single slab of harder gray limestone, the two majestic beasts facing each other are officially recognized as the oldest monumental sculpture in all of Europe, created around 1250 before the Common Era. They are not simply decorative, they are the centerpiece, the focal point of the entire architectural statement. The composition is one of powerful heraldic symmetry. Two lionesses, their powerful bodies rendered in profile, rise on their hind legs. Their front paws rest not on the ground but on the tops of two tall, stylized altars that flank a single central column. This creates a powerful tiered effect, a sense of ascending order and sacred support. The animals are not snarling or attacking. Their posture is one of alert, regal guardianship, a frozen moment of poised and eternal vigilance. Every line of their carved bodies, from the curve of their backs to the musculature of their legs, speaks of a sculptor who had observed these animals and understood their inherent power. Yet the most haunting feature is what is absent. The lionesses' heads are missing. They were almost certainly crafted separately from a different, more valuable material, perhaps gleaming bronze or polished steatite, and attached with dowels. The empty sockets where those heads once turned to stare down the approaching visitor only deepen the mystery. Who or what did they gaze upon? A sun disk? A goddess, the face of the king himself. Their removal was not an accident of time. It was a deliberate act, a silencing that adds one more layer of enigma to this ancient sentinel. To stand before this scene is to witness the moment when European art stepped onto a monumental stage, not with tentative steps, but with the confident, roaring presence of a guardian lioness. But why lions? This choice was no accident. Across the ancient world, from the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia to the banks of the Nile in Egypt, the lion reigned as the ultimate symbol of raw, untamed power. It represented the king's strength, his ferocity in battle, and his rightful dominion over the natural world. For the Mycenaeans, placing these colossal creatures at their main gate was a deliberate act of psychological warfare and royal propaganda. To any visitor, trader, or potential enemy walking the winding approach, the message was unmistakable. The rulers within possessed the strength of the mightiest predator. They were invincible, protected, and touched by the divine. The gate itself became a roaring proclamation of authority, carved in stone for all to see. Yet the symbolism here may run even deeper. Look closely at their posture. These are not lions rampant in a coat of arms. They stand calmly, almost ceremonially, with their paws resting on altars framing a central column. This arrangement suggests a sacred dimension. Many scholars believe they are not just royal symbols, but perhaps representations of a powerful goddess, a protected deity of the palace. They could be an early depiction of what later Greek culture would call Potnia Theron, the mistress of animals, a divine figure who commands the beasts of the wild. Or perhaps they guard a representation of the palace itself, symbolized by that central column, which echoes the grand wooden pillars found in the throne rooms inside. This transforms the gate from a mere show of force into a sacred threshold, where political power and spiritual protection were inseparably fused. And then there is the haunting void where their heads should be. The empty necks point inward toward the center of the triangle they guard. What magnificent sight once held their gaze, a polished bronze sun disk radiating the favor of the heavens. A carved image of the great goddess herself, or perhaps most intriguingly, the face of the Mycenaean king, forever staring back through the eyes of his divine guardians. Their silence is a question carved in stone. What did those lost eyes witness, and why was their gaze so deliberately taken from us? Between the guardians rests a silent pillar, and it may be the most telling detail of all. Flanked by the lionesses, a single tapered column rises from an altar-like base, crowned with a unique, rounded capital that seems to hold up the very apex of the triangle. This is no mere decorative filler. Its prominent central position demands interpretation. One compelling theory is that this column is the symbolic heart of the citadel, a stone representation of the great wooden pillars that held up the roof of the Megaron, the royal throne room deep within the palace. In this reading, the lionesses are not just protecting a gate, they are guarding the very idea of kingship and the central authority of the state. Another, more spiritual, interpretation sees it as a sacred aniconic pillar, a representation of a deity whose image was too powerful to be depicted directly. The column becomes the dwelling place of divine power, watched over by the fierce beasts, but the most fascinating clue lies in its distinctive shape. This column, with its downward taper, wider at the top and narrower at the base, is not a Mycenaean invention. It is a direct echo of the architectural style of the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete, a sophisticated maritime culture that flourished centuries before Mycenae rose to dominance. The Minoans built magnificent, unfortified palaces adorned with just such columns, often painted in vibrant reds and blacks, symbols of their elegant and artistic world. By the time the Lion Gate was built, the Mycenaean world had absorbed or perhaps conquered the Minoan centers. So what does this mean, finding a quintessentially Minoan form at the heart of the most Mycenaean of symbols? It speaks of a relationship far more complex than simple destruction. It suggests admiration, appropriation, and a deliberate claiming of older symbols of power and sophistication. The Mycenaean warlords may have taken the throne, but they seem to understand the potent language of those who came before, embedding a piece of Minoan cultural prestige into their own monumental boast of strength. The column stands as a quiet testament to a blended legacy, where the art of the conquered was used to magnify the glory of the conqueror. The scale of the task is almost incomprehensible from our modern perspective. We must envision a world without cranes, without iron chisels, without powered vehicles. Every step in raising the Lion Gate was a victory of pure human ingenuity and relentless effort over the stubbornness of stone. It began in a distant quarry where workers likely used water and wooden wedges to fracture the bedrock, then painstakingly shaped the colossal blocks with stone hammers and bronze tools, a process agonizingly slow and wasteful of material. Moving a 20-ton lintel stone even a single mile was a feat of logistics. The most accepted theory involves a system of wooden rollers. Teams would have laid a track of felled tree trunks in front of the stone slab, which rested on a wooden sledge. As oxen or hundreds of men pulled with ropes, workers at the back would constantly retrieve the rollers that emerged and rush them to the front, creating a slow, rolling pathway. This required not just muscle, but perfect coordination and a flat, prepared road leading up to the citadel hill. Getting the stone up the steep incline to the gate's position presented the next colossal hurdle. Here, archaeologists suggest the likely use of a massive earthen ramp. Workers would have built a sloping embankment of packed soil and rubble against the rising wall, creating a gradual incline up which the sledge could be dragged. With each stone placed, the ramp would be extended higher, a temporary mountain of earth constructed just to build a permanent one of stone. The final act, positioning the lintel atop the towering uprights, may have involved a combination of levers, ropes, and incremental lifting using wooden cribbing, stacking timber frames to raise the stone inch by heartbreaking inch. The organization behind this speaks volumes. This was not a community barn raising. It was a state-directed project requiring a commander who could conscript, feed, and house a small army of laborers for months or even years. It was the ultimate demonstration of a king's power to command the landscape itself to reshape itself according to his will. The sculpture of the lionesses presented a different, more refined challenge. The triangular slab is of a harder, finer-grained limestone, chosen for its ability to hold detailed carving. Most scholars believe this block was rough shaped in the quarry but finished in place high up on the wall. Sculptors would have worked from scaffolding, using bronze points and abrasives like sand to slowly tease the forms from the stone. This in-situ work was dangerous and precise, a testament to master craftsmen working under the direct gaze of their ruler. Every chip of stone removed was irreversible. The final, polished guardians were not an afterthought. They were the crowning glory of a project that marshaled the entire kingdom's resources, a permanent testament to what a society could achieve when united under a single, formidable purpose. The gate's silence belies the cacophony of its creation, the shouts of foremen, the groan of ropes, the endless percussion of stone on stone that once echoed through this now silent valley. Their empty necks are a wound in the stone, a silent question that has echoed for 35 centuries. The most intimate part of the Lion Gate's guardians, their faces and their gaze, are simply gone. This is not the slow erosion of time which would have worn down the bodies as well. The break is clean, deliberate. The heads were almost certainly separate pieces, skillfully attached. So what happened to them? The leading theory is also the most material one. They were likely cast from a precious, gleaming material like bronze, perhaps even overlaid with gold leaf. In a civilization that treasured metalwork, as the breathtaking gold death masks from the royal graves attest, bronze heads would have transformed the sculpture. Sunlight would have flashed from their forms, making the beast seem alive and watchful. If this was the case, their fate is sadly straightforward. When the palace fell into decline and was abandoned, those valuable metal heads would have been the first things looted, pried off and melted down for their raw material, their artistic and spiritual significance lost to the furnace. Another possibility is that they were carved from a different type of stone, perhaps a darker, more ornate marble or steatite, which was more susceptible to weathering or simply broke free and shattered on the rocks below over the millennia. Yet the placement feels too high, the loss too complete for mere accident. This leads to a darker, more intentional possibility. What if the heads were destroyed on purpose? When the Mycenaean world collapsed around 1100 before the Common Era, it was a violent, chaotic end. Palaces burned, trade routes vanished, and the centralized power they represented shattered. The removal of the lions' heads could have been an act of iconoclasm, a deliberate defacement by new invaders, or even by a rebellious population seeking to symbolically destroy the power of the old rulers. To tear down the stone bodies was impossible, but to decapitate their symbols, to blind the guardians, was a potent act of erasure. Modern technology has allowed us to peer into that void with new eyes. Archaeologists and digital artists have created reconstructions offering a glimpse of what might have been. These models often show proud, stylized feline faces, sometimes with open mouths as if caught in a silent roar, their bronze surfaces reflecting the sky. Seeing these digital recreations is a poignant experience. It makes the loss feel suddenly palpable, personal. We are no longer looking at an abstract ruin, but at a specific masterpiece that was vandalized or stripped. It transforms the gate from a monument into a victim of history, and its silent, headless vigil becomes infinitely more haunting. What expressions did those lost faces hold? Was it a stern warning, a regal calm, or something more divine? Their absence forces us to look closer, to question not just how they were made, but why they were taken, and what their silence has been trying to tell us all this time. The true power of the Lion Gate was felt not in its stillness, but in its use. This was the sole ceremonial entrance to the citadel of Mycenae, the bottleneck through which all significant life of the kingdom had to flow. Approaching it was a carefully choreographed experience of intimidation and awe. A long, narrow ramp wound its way up the steep hillside, flanked by towering Cyclopean walls that funneled all visitors into a single file. There was no rushing this approach. Every step was observed from the battlements above, every person made to feel small and exposed before they even reached the threshold. Finally, they would turn a corner and come face to face with the massive, shadowed doorway, framed by the silent, headless guardians in their triangle of stone. To pass through was to submit both physically and symbolically to the authority within. Think of the processions that once animated this stone stage. A Mycenaean wanax or king, returning victorious from battle, would have led his armored warriors and spoils of war through this gate, the lions seeming to roar approval for his triumph. Priests and priestesses, clad in ritual finery, might have carried sacred objects in solemn parades for festivals, moving from the palace Megaron out to the wider world and back again, sanctifying the entrance with each passage. Ambassadors from distant lands like Egypt or the Hittite Empire, bearing gifts and scrolls, would have been marched up this ramp, their eyes drawn upward to the monumental sculpture, a clear, non-verbal message about the sophistication and might of their host. And in darker moments, prisoners of war or condemned criminals would have been forced beneath that lintel, their final steps into the citadel underscored by the immutable judgment of the stone beasts overhead. The gate was the ultimate instrument of controlled access. In times of peace, it regulated commerce and ceremony. In times of siege, its narrow passage could be sealed with massive wooden doors, likely reinforced with bronze, making the citadel virtually impregnable. But its function transcended mere security. It was the proscenium arch for the daily theater of Mycenaean kingship. Every crossing was a performance that reinforced the social order. The king did not just live behind a wall, he lived behind a symbol, and to enter his realm required an audience with that symbol first. The architecture forced a pause, a moment of reflection and acknowledgement of power before any business could be done. This was not just a door, it was a filter for reality, shaping every encounter and engraving the hierarchy of the kingdom into the very landscape. The silent lions witnessed it all, the pomp, the piety, the pride, and the fear, making the gate not a static monument, but the living, beating heart of a lost civilization's public identity. Just inside the gate, the ground holds a secret. A mere 30 paces to the right of the Lion Gate, within the newly fortified walls, lies a sacred precinct marked by a low, circular wall of stone slabs. This is Grave Circle A. Its discovery by Heinrich Schliemann was the stuff of legend, for within these 6 deep shaft graves, he uncovered a breathtaking hoard of gold. There were intricately carved death masks, one famously proclaimed as the face of Agamemnon himself, along with golden cups, ornate jewelry, and bronze weapons inlaid with scenes of war and hunting. These were not just burials, they were statements of divine kingship, and they were old. Crucially, these graves date to the 16th century before the Common Era, a full 300 years before the Lion Gate and its towering walls were built. For centuries, this royal cemetery sat outside the citadel's older, smaller fortifications. Then, in the 13th century, everything changed. The Mycenaean rulers embarked on their greatest building project, expanding the walls to an immense scale. And when they laid out the new defensive circuit, they made a deliberate, profound choice. They drew the line so that the new, monumental Lion Gate would sit directly adjacent to, and would now enclose, this ancient burial ground. This was no architectural accident. It was a calculated act of political and spiritual theater. By bringing the graves inside the walls, the later kings were physically connecting their reign to the hallowed dead. The mighty gate became a ceremonial entrance not just to a palace but to an ancestral shrine. Imagine the symbolic power this created. A visiting ambassador would pass beneath the watchful lions, feeling the weight of Mycenae's present military might, and then immediately encounter the silent, golden authority of its deified past. The living king's power was thus framed as an inheritance, a direct lineage of strength flowing from the heroes buried in the circle. The lions in this light are not only guardians of the citadel. They are the eternal sentinels for the sleeping ancestors, their stone vigil ensuring that the source of the kingdom's legitimacy remained forever protected, and forever under the control of the current ruler. This spatial relationship transforms our understanding of the gate. It was not merely a defensive feature, it was the keystone in an ideology of power, a bridge between the living and the dead that cemented a dynasty's right to rule. But how can we be so certain of its age? The answer lies not just in the stones themselves, but in the earth that cradled them. Archaeologists have pinpointed the creation of the Lion Gate to around 1250 before the Common Era, a date with a margin of error of only a few decades. This precise dating isn't guesswork, it's a scientific puzzle solved by the humble fragments left behind. The primary clue comes from pottery. As the massive foundations for the gate and its new walls were dug, workers discarded broken cups, jars, and bowls. This everyday trash became a time capsule. Ceramic styles evolved in distinct, recognizable phases throughout the Mycenaean period. The pottery found sealed in the construction layers of the Lion Gate belongs definitively to a style known as Late Helladic IIIB. This is a key phase, the absolute zenith of Mycenaean artistic and political power. We can cross-check this with other sites. The engineering techniques seen at Mycenae, the specific style of the Cyclopean masonry, and the use of the relieving triangle, appear in other fortified palaces across Greece like Turins and Pylos, all built or expanded during this same explosive period of wealth and centralization. The historical context sharpens the picture. This was an era of immense prosperity fueled by vast trade networks. The Mycenaeans were exporting olive oil, wine, and perfumed unguents across the Mediterranean, importing amber, ivory, and gold. The Lion Gate is the architectural expression of that confidence, a project that required stable, long-term investment of resources and labor. Yet this precise dating casts a long, poignant shadow. 1250 before the Common Era places the gate's construction barely a century, perhaps only a few generations before the catastrophic collapse that swept across the entire eastern Mediterranean around 1200. This period saw palaces burn, writing systems vanish, and trade routes disintegrate in what historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse. So the magnificent Lion Gate did not stand for 1,000 years of uninterrupted glory. It was built at the very peak of Mycenaean civilization, a symbol of its greatest strength, just as the foundations of that world were about to tremble. It is a monument born at the summit, destined to become a sentinel over the ruins. The style of the guardians is a puzzle carved in stone. To understand it, we must look beyond Mycenae to the wider artistic world of the Bronze Age Mediterranean. The lionesses do not fit neatly into any single cultural box. Instead, they represent a deliberate and powerful fusion, a visual testament to the Mycenaeans' unique position at a crossroads of civilizations. To the south, on the island of Crete, the Minoan civilization had perfected an art of breathtaking naturalism and fluid motion. Their frescoes showed dolphins leaping with graceful curves, figures in vibrant procession, and a profound love for the natural world rendered with almost joyful elegance. The Mycenaean lions share none of this flowing, organic detail. Their forms are more blocky, more geometric. Yet, some scholars detect a whisper of Minoan influence in the subtle rendering of the animal's musculature, and the very fact that such large-scale sculpture was attempted. A boldness of vision the Mycenaeans may have admired from their sophisticated neighbors. In stark contrast stands the artistic tradition of the great empires to the east, in Anatolia and Mesopotamia. The Hittites and Assyrians used art as a direct language of power. Their reliefs and guardian figures, like the colossal Lamassu, are rigid, formal, and symbolic. They are designed to be read, not felt, projecting an immutable hierarchical authority. This is where the Lion Gate finds its closest kinship. The heraldic symmetry, the front-facing, confrontational posture of the beasts, and their clear function as royal propaganda are profoundly Near Eastern in concept. The Mycenaeans were not mere copyists, however. They took this formal, symbolic framework and infused it with their own sensibility. The lionesses possess a latent energy, a coiled strength in their haunches that suggests vitality, even without the Minoan love for flowing lines. This eclectic blend is the key to understanding Mycenaean identity. They were, above all, pragmatic synthesizers. As warriors, they valued the intimidating, symbolic art of the empires they traded with and sometimes fought. As traders connected to a vast network, they absorbed aesthetic ideas from everywhere, from Egypt to the Levant. The Lion Gate sculpture is their masterpiece of cultural alchemy. It takes the rigid, official language of Near Eastern power and remixes it with a touch of borrowed grandeur and a raw Peloponnesian strength, creating something entirely new and unmistakably their own. It is the art of a people confident enough to take what served them and forge from it a symbol for the ages. The stone lions witnessed the dawn of history, but they would soon stand guard over legend. Mycenae's greatest fame came not from its own records, but from the epic poems of Homer composed centuries after its fall. In those tales, this was the kingdom of Agamemnon, the powerful king who led the united Greek forces to besiege the city of Troy. For generations of later Greeks, the very name Mycenae was synonymous with that heroic age, a time of larger-than-life warriors and world-shaking events. So it is almost impossible not to wonder, gazing up at the weathered limestone, could this be the very gate through which Agamemnon returned in triumph, only to meet his tragic fate at the hands of his wife Clytemnestra? The archaeology gives us a clear, if sobering, answer. The Lion Gate was built around 1250 before the Common Era, the most plausible historical date for a conflict that inspired the Trojan War stories is over a century later, around the time of the Great Collapse. So the historical Agamemnon, if he existed, would have walked through an earlier, simpler gateway. The monumental lions were raised near the end, a symbol of a civilization at its peak, but perhaps already sensing the storm clouds gathering. Yet, this factual timeline does not diminish the gate's legendary power, it transforms it. For the Greeks of the classical period, like the traveler and writer Pausanias who visited the ruins in the 2nd century Common Era, such distinctions were meaningless. They stood before the most imposing, ancient structure they could imagine on Greek soil. Seeing those colossal Cyclopean walls and the majestic, headless guardians, they naturally believed they were looking upon the very architecture of their heroic past. To them, this was unequivocally Agamemnon's gate. The physical reality of the stones validated the stories. The gate became a pilgrimage site, a tangible relic that connected the Greece of philosophers and city-states to the misty, glorious age of its foundation myths. In this way, the Lion Gate performed a second, enduring function. It was a bridge across time, transforming a Mycenaean symbol of earthly power into a Greek monument to epic memory. The silence of the lions now guarded not just a forgotten citadel, but the very threshold of myth. Yet the gate story did not end with the collapse of its builders. For centuries after the last Mycenaean king fell silent, the Lion Gate stood abandoned, a forgotten sentinel on a deserted hill. Slowly, nature began to reclaim its own. Earthquakes shook loose some stones, winter rains washed soil down the slopes, and hardy shrubs took root in the crevices of the mighty walls. Over generations, wind-blown dust and debris accumulated, gradually burying the lower courses of the gate and the approach ramp, until only the very top of the lintel and the triangular slab with its headless guardians remained visible above the rising earth. It became a strange, geometric outcrop in a pastoral landscape, its true purpose lost to the farmers and shepherds who grazed their flocks around it. Remarkably, this blanket of soil became its protector, shielding the fragile limestone from the worst of the elements and human interference for over 2,000 years. The memory of Mycenae, however, never completely faded. In the 2nd century of the Common Era, a Greek traveler named Pausanias wrote a detailed guidebook to the sites of ancient Greece. When he visited the ruins, he stood before what he called the Tomb of Agamemnon, a structure clearly referencing the Lion Gate and the nearby Tholos tombs. He described the walls built by the Cyclopes and the lions on the gate, proving that even then, the monument was a recognizable, if misunderstood, relic of a legendary past. His brief account is a vital thread connecting the classical world to the Bronze Age, a written witness to the gate's enduring presence in the landscape. Through the Byzantine era and the long centuries of Ottoman rule, the hill of Mycenae was little more than a quiet archaeological site, known locally but not systematically explored. The gate slumbered on, its stones occasionally quarried by locals for nearby buildings, yet its core structure remained stubbornly intact. Its modern rebirth, as we've seen, began with Schliemann's dramatic excavations in the 1870s, which cleared the earth away and revealed the full majesty of the entrance once more. This act of rediscovery did more than uncover stones. It reconnected Greece to a foundational layer of its own history. In the modern era, the need to preserve this irreplaceable monument became paramount. Careful conservation work stabilized the stones, and measures were taken to protect the site from the wear of countless visitors. This global significance was formally recognized in 1999, when the archaeological sites of Mycenae and Turin were inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This designation acknowledges the Lion Gate as a masterpiece of human creative genius and a unique testimony to the Mycenaean civilization. Today, it stands not as a ruin but as a survivor. It has witnessed the entire arc of Greek history, from the Bronze Age kings to the classical city-states, from Roman provinces to Byzantine churches, from Ottoman rule to the modern nation. For Greece, it is a powerful symbol of cultural endurance and deep historical roots, a tangible reminder that their story stretches back into a heroic, mist-shrouded past far older than the Parthenon. Every visitor who passes beneath its lintel today is walking a path trodden by priests, warriors, kings, and poets for 35 centuries, touching a stone link in an unbroken chain of memory. But this monument was not alone in its ambition. The Mycenaean Lion Gate stands as a singular masterpiece, yet it was part of a wider architectural conversation happening across the ancient world. Even at Mycenae itself, there was a second, smaller counterpart. Archaeologists refer to it as the Postern Gate, or sometimes the Lioness Gate, located on the citadel's north side. Here, a much smaller triangular relief once existed above the doorway, featuring a single, confronting lioness. Time has been far less kind to this sibling guardian. Only faint, weathered outlines remain in the stone, a ghostly echo of the main gate's grandeur, reminding us that this symbolic language was repeated throughout the fortress. To truly appreciate the Mycenaean achievement, however, we must look far beyond the Greek mainland. Around the same time, over 1,000 miles to the east in central Anatolia, the capital of the Hittite Empire, Hattusa, was being fortified with its own monumental gates. The most famous is the Lion Gate there, where two massive, full-bodied stone lions project from the gate's foundations, their mouths open in a perpetual roar aimed at any approaching enemy. The concept is strikingly similar fierce felines as guardians of royal power, yet the execution is profoundly different. The Hittite lions are fully sculpted in the round, integrated into the wall's structure, and radiate a more immediate, aggressive physicality. Meanwhile, in Egypt, pharaohs were building temple complexes like Karnak, where entranceways were flanked by rows of ram-headed sphinxes or colossal statues of the king himself. These were not just gates, they were processional avenues designed to overwhelm the senses and demonstrate a ruler's divine connection. What does this tell us? The Mycenaeans were not working in a vacuum. They were active participants in an international Bronze Age dialogue, a shared language of power where monumental gateways served as billboards for a state's strength and legitimacy. The specific dialect they spoke, however, was uniquely their own. They adopted the Near Eastern idea of the guardian beast and the Egyptian sense of scale, but fused it with their own engineering genius, the relieving triangle, and their own symbolic vocabulary like the mysterious central column. Their gate was not a copy, but a confident reply in stone, proving they understood the rules of this grand architectural game and were capable of playing at the highest level. This global context makes the Lion Gate even more remarkable. It shows a civilization looking outward, absorbing influences, and then synthesizing them into something that was unmistakably and proudly Mycenaean. Heinrich Schliemann's dramatic reveal was only the opening chapter. the real work of understanding the Lion Gate began with the meticulous, less sensational archaeologists who followed. The Greek Archaeological Society took over stewardship of the site, and in the early 20th century, a British archaeologist named Alan Wace began a new era of excavation. Wace approached Mycenae not as a treasure hunter but as a scientist. His careful stratigraphy, documenting every layer of soil and every fragment of pottery, allowed him to build a precise timeline. He clarified that the Grand Walls and the Lion Gate were built later than the royal graves they enclosed, solidifying our understanding of the site's deliberate evolution. His work moved the narrative from myth to history, proving that the true treasure was not just gold but context. Today, the investigation continues with tools Schliemann could never have dreamed of, all designed to interrogate the stone without ever touching it. Teams now use high-resolution laser scanning to create a perfect, three-dimensional digital twin of the entire gate. Every crack, every subtle undulation in the limestone is recorded with millimeter precision. This model allows researchers to measure erosion over time, study the geometry of the relieving triangle down to the smallest angle, and even simulate stresses to understand the gate's remarkable stability. Photogrammetry, which uses hundreds of overlapping photographs to build a detailed 3D map, captures the surface in incredible color and texture, revealing tool marks invisible to the naked eye. The faintest grooves left by a Bronze Age chisel can be analyzed to understand the craftsman's techniques. Perhaps most revealing is geological analysis. Scientists can now take microscopic samples from the surface or use spectrometers to analyze the stone's composition from a distance. This tells a story of origin and endurance. They can identify the specific quarries the limestone came from, tracing the journey of these colossal blocks. They can map the patterns of weathering, seeing exactly how 3,500 years of rain, wind, and pollution have affected the sculpture. This data is crucial for preservation, helping conservators decide where to intervene and how to protect the gate from the increasing threats of modern climate change. Each scan, each spectral reading peels back a layer of time. We are no longer just looking at a monument, we are listening to it. The stone itself becomes an archive, and these gentle, non-invasive technologies are allowing us to read its pages for the first time. Every new dataset challenges an old assumption, offering a clearer, though often more complex, picture of the minds that built it. The guardians may be silent, but they are beginning to speak through science. The very forces that created this masterpiece now conspire to erase it. For 3.5 millennia, the Lion Gate has endured through conquest and collapse, but its greatest battle is against the slow, invisible agents of the modern world. The primary enemy is chemical. Air pollution, particularly sulfur dioxide from industrial activity and vehicle exhaust, mixes with rainwater to form a weak acid. This acid rain doesn't dramatically dissolve the limestone, but it initiates a slow, destructive cycle. It reacts with the stone's surface, converting the hard calcium carbonate into a soft, crumbly gypsum crust. This crust is then more easily washed away by the next rainfall, taking with it a microscopic layer of the original carved surface. Over decades, this process, called sulfation, can blur the sharp lines of the lioness's musculature and smooth away the subtle tool marks left by the Bronze Age sculptor. Each gentle Mediterranean shower now carries a faint, corrosive bite. Beyond chemistry, physics exerts its own relentless pressure. The Peloponnese is a seismically active region. Even minor, frequent tremors, imperceptible to visitors, send vibrations through the hill, placing incremental stress on the ancient joints of the Cyclopean masonry. A major earthquake remains a constant, catastrophic threat, one that the Mycenaean engineers, for all their skill, could never have fully designed against. And then there is the impact of the gate's own fame. The feet of millions of visitors year after year create a different kind of erosion. The stone paving of the approach ramp, once trod by Mycenaean kings, is now visibly worn smooth in places by modern sneakers and sandals. The constant vibration from foot traffic, the oils from human hands, and even the humidity from our breath contribute to a gradual, cumulative wear. Preserving the gate is thus a delicate, never-ending campaign fought on multiple fronts. Conservators act as both doctors and detectives. They use non-invasive monitoring like tiny glass telltales glued across hairline cracks to detect the slightest movement. They carefully map water runoff patterns during storms, designing nearly invisible channels and drains to divert damaging streams away from the vulnerable stonework. Cleaning is an exercise in extreme restraint. It is not about making the gate look new, but about halting active decay. Specialists might use soft brushes, distilled water, and occasionally gentle poultices to draw out harmful salts from the stone's pores, always testing their methods on unseen areas first. Every action is documented, debated, and undertaken with a profound awareness of responsibility. This work forces a difficult ethical question upon us. Where is the line between preservation and alteration? Should we simply monitor the gate and allow it to weather naturally, accepting that its slow fading is part of its authentic history, a testament to time itself? Or do we have a duty to actively intervene, to use every tool of modern science to freeze this moment, ensuring that a child 500 years from now can stand in the same awe we do today? There is no easy answer. Each cleaning, each stabilizing injection of mortar is an interpretation. It reflects our modern values, our desire to hold onto the past. The Mycenaeans built their gate to project power for generations, but they could not have conceived of preserving it for millennia. Our struggle to save it adds a poignant, urgent chapter to its long story. A reminder that its survival now depends not on warrior kings, but on our own collective care and conscience. The meaning carved into that triangle is a riddle scholars are still trying to solve. While we see lions and a pillar, the original message may have been something entirely different. One of the most fascinating debates asks a simple question: what if these are not lions at all? In Mycenaean art, especially in their exquisite gold rings and frescoes, another mythical creature appears with striking frequency: the griffin. This powerful beast, with the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle, was a potent symbol of divine power and guardianship, often shown flanking a throne or a central figure. Could the headless creatures on the gate actually be griffins? Their posture, rising on hind legs with paws on altars, matches known depictions of these mythical guardians. If their missing heads once bore the sharp beaks of eagles, the entire symbolism shifts from earthly royal power to a more explicit statement of divine protection, a gateway watched over by creatures from the realm of the gods themselves. This theory reminds us that we are interpreting fragments, and our modern eyes may automatically see what is familiar rather than what was intended. Equally compelling is the mystery of the central pillar. If the animals are divine guardians, then what they flank becomes even more significant. Many researchers believe this column is not an architectural symbol, but a direct representation of a deity. This could be an aniconic symbol of the great goddess, a powerful figure who appears throughout Minoan and Mycenaean religion. She was a goddess of nature, of animals, and of the palace itself. In this reading, the lionesses or griffins are not just royal protectors, they are attendants to the goddess, their paws resting on altars in a scene of eternal worship. The gate becomes less a martial threat and more a sacred tableau, announcing that the kingdom itself is under the direct patronage of a divine power. This transforms the entrance into a holy site, where crossing the threshold meant moving from the profane world into a space sanctioned by the gods. Another school of thought steps away from religion and looks toward politics. Could this entire standardized composition be the earliest known example of European heraldry? Centuries before medieval knights painted lions on their shields, the rulers of Mycenae may have codified this specific image, their royal emblem. The symmetrical, iconic nature of the scene fits perfectly. It is unique, memorable, and instantly identifiable. Anyone in the Bronze Age Mediterranean who saw this symbol, perhaps on seals or official documents, would know it represented the authority of Mycenae. The gate, then, was the ultimate public display of this coat of arms, carved in stone for all to see. It was a brand declaring ownership and lineage, asserting that this fortress and everything within it belonged to the House of the Lion, or perhaps the House of the Griffin. Perhaps the most haunting theory is that the scene depicts a specific myth or ritual now completely lost to us. We have fragments of Mycenaean stories in later Greek mythology, but their own original epics are silent. The precise arrangement, the altars, the central pillar, could all be elements from a foundational tale everyone at the time would have recognized. A story that explained the origins of the royal line or a sacred covenant with the gods. Without a written narrative, we are left staring at a single, frozen frame from a long-forgotten film, trying to guess the entire plot. These ongoing debates are not signs of scholarly failure. They are the proof that the Lion Gate is still doing its job. It makes us stop and look and question. It refuses to give up all its secrets. Every new interpretation is a conversation across 35 centuries. An attempt to hear an echo of the meaning those Bronze Age sculptors carved with such confident purpose. The stone may be silent, but the discussion it inspires is very much alive. The influence of the Lion Gate stretches far beyond the dusty hill of Mycenae. It holds a foundational place in every major art history textbook, universally acknowledged as the very first monumental sculpture in the European tradition. This is where the story of Greek art begins, not with the serene perfection of the classical age, but with this raw, powerful statement carved in limestone. For scholars, it is the crucial link, the prototype that connects the symbolic art of the ancient Near East to the human-centered ideals that would later define Greece. It stands as a monumental comma in the sentence of history, pausing the flow of older civilizations and introducing a new, distinctly European voice in stone. This iconic status has made it a powerful muse for creators across centuries. Modern architects have drawn inspiration from its imposing presence and brilliant engineering, while fantasy authors and filmmakers look to its weathered majesty when imagining the gates of lost mythical cities. Its silhouette evokes a sense of ancient power and forgotten secrets, a visual shorthand for a heroic age. This cultural resonance is cemented in everyday life. The image of the Lion Gate has been stamped onto Greek currency and postage stamps, transforming it from an archaeological site into a national symbol, a badge of cultural pride that connects modern Greece to its deepest, most epic roots. It is no longer just a relic to be studied, it is an icon to be recognized, a shape that immediately conjures ideas of mystery, endurance, and monumental grandeur in the mind of anyone who sees it. We can now cross that threshold in our minds thanks to the magic of digital archaeology. Picture the gate not as a somber gray monument, but as a vibrant polychrome masterpiece. The massive limestone blocks were likely covered in a smooth layer of white plaster, creating a pristine canvas. Upon this, the Mycenaeans would have applied bold, mineral-based paints. The central column, that enigmatic pillar between the lionesses, almost certainly blazed with color. Based on Minoan precedents and traces of pigment found at other sites, it was likely painted a deep, sacred red or perhaps a brilliant azure blue, its rounded capital picked out in contrasting yellow or black. Now imagine the guardians themselves whole once more. Their missing heads are restored not as plain stone but as gleaming bronze carefully cast and fitted. Sunlight would have flashed on their metallic surfaces, making their eyes seem to glint with watchful life. the lionesses' bodies, carved from that harder grey stone, might have been accentuated with painted details, black outlines emphasizing their powerful muscles, perhaps ochre hints in their stone fur. The triangular slab itself could have been framed with geometric borders in red and blue, turning the entire sculpture into a giant, dazzling heraldic shield mounted high on the whitewashed wall. This was no austere fortress entry. It was a brilliant, calculated spectacle designed to overwhelm the senses. Today, teams of researchers and digital artists use advanced three-dimensional modeling to bring this vision back to life. By scanning every millimeter of the actual gate, they create a perfect digital twin. Then, drawing on archaeological evidence for Bronze Age pigments and metallurgy, they layer on the most probable colors and materials. The result is more than a still image, it is an immersive experience. You can put on a virtual reality headset and stand at the base of the newly built ramp, looking up at the fully restored, painted gate in the noon sun. You can then walk forward, watching as the colossal, colorful lions loom larger and pass through the shadow of the lintel into the bustling citadel beyond. These reconstructions are not fantasy, they are educated, evidence-based hypotheses that serve a vital purpose. They shatter our modern misconception that ancient monuments were meant to be the bare, natural stone we see today. For the Mycenaeans, raw stone was merely the skeleton. Color and gleam were the skin and soul. Seeing the gate in its intended splendor changes everything. It transforms it from a silent, stoic ruin into a loud, proud, and living proclamation. It helps us understand that the awe we feel today, standing before its weathered grandeur, is only a faint echo of the breathtaking, almost intimidating brilliance it projected in its prime. The digital resurrection allows us for a moment to see with Bronze Age eyes, and in doing so, we finally hear the gate's true, thunderous voice. That final, thunderous voice did not fall silent with the fall of Mycenae. It became a whisper that traveled down the centuries, a blueprint for how a civilization announces its arrival. The Lion Gate's true legacy is that it established a formula for monumental power, one that would be copied, adapted, and reinvented across the Western world. Its core elements, the imposing approach, the massive stone frame, the crowning symbolic sculpture, created a template for the grand entrance. You can see its direct descendants in the magnificent propylaea, the formal gateways to Greek sanctuaries like the Acropolis in Athens. Those structures, while more refined and columned, served the same essential purpose, controlling access and framing a transition into sacred space, all under the gaze of sculpted gods and heroes. The concept traveled further, evolving into the Roman triumphal arch. Those freestanding monuments, like the Arch of Titus, traded guardian beasts for reliefs of conquest, but the psychological function was identical: to awe the citizen and glorify the state, to turn a simple passage into a theater of victory. More abstractly, the gate codified a language of intimidation and legitimacy. It proved that architecture could be a weapon of psychology, that scale and symbol could project authority as effectively as an army. This idea echoes through history, from the gargoyle-guarded cathedrals of medieval Europe to the neoclassical facades of modern state capitals. The specific message changes, but the method remains, using stone to shape belief and command respect. Ultimately, the Lion Gate marks a profound turning point. Before it, the great centers of art and power lay to the east in Egypt and Mesopotamia. With its construction, mainland Greece planted a flag in the earth. It announced in undeniable stone that this rocky peninsula was no longer a periphery, but a new center of civilization, capable of artistic ambition on a colossal scale. It was a declaration of arrival, and the world of architecture has been answering its call ever since. So the Lion Gate stands today not merely as a ruin, but as a perfect fusion of three timeless ideas. It is, first, a marvel of engineering, a testament to minds that understood weight and balance so completely they could redirect a mountain's force with a simple, empty triangle. It is, second, a masterpiece of symbolic art, where the raw power of the lion was harnessed into a heraldic statement of divine kingship and sacred protection. And above all, it is our clearest window into the mighty, mysterious, and ultimately vanished world of the Mycenaeans, a civilization of warrior traders who built their legend in stone. This triad of meaning is why it holds the undisputed title of Europe's oldest monumental sculpture, a title carved not in 1250 before the Common Era, but earned through 3,500 years of silent endurance. The heads of its guardians are lost, the gold of its kings is long dispersed, and the palace halls behind it are empty echoes, yet the gate itself remains. Those headless lionesses still command the hill, their stone roar, a roar of ingenuity, of ambition, of a culture's proudest statement still echoes across 3 millennia. It asks us not just to admire its age, but to listen to its story. What does this ancient gateway mean to you? Does it speak of human ingenuity, the fragility of empires, or the timeless desire to leave a mark that outlasts us all? Share your thoughts below, and if this journey into the deep past has captivated you, there are countless other ancient mysteries waiting for their stories to be told.